The New Orleans Saints are better off focusing their quarterback development on Spencer Rattler than they are any of the realistic options in the 2025 NFL draft class. We got all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints racked up 8 sacks in their loss to the Washington Commanders, and those sacks show some growth on the defensive line. We're also going to take a look at the Saints' 2-minute drive and why it was outstanding, both in terms of play calling and execution. We're going to lead everything off today with our biggest topic, which is why the New Orleans Saints should focus all their quarterback development focuses and energies over the course of the next season on Spencer Rattler, as opposed to wasting their time with the realistic options left in the 2025 NFL draft class. We appreciate you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day here for you, whether you're joining us for your first time or your next time. Thank you very much for being here. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can place your first $5 bet as a new customer. And if you win that $5 bet, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. The New Orleans Saints are better off avoiding the 2025 NFL draft class because it has just gotten worse and worse and worse by the day. And if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm focusing my development at that position over the course of the next season on quarterback Spencer Rattler, or at least quarterback Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. I'm focusing on the young guys that are already in the building, that have already invested time in, all that other stuff. If I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm hitting skip. I'm swiping whichever direction. I never did the dating apps. I'm sorry. I'm swiping whatever direction is no on the 2025 NFL draft class when it comes to the quarterback class. Because outside of Cam Ward out of Miami and outside of Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado, there's really not enough talent left on the pool of draftable quarterbacks that we expect to be available for 2025 to really say, okay, going to invest there and then go ahead and try to develop another quarterback to compete with these young guys. It seems like anybody that's going to compete with Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener for the Saints' future is either going to come from free agency, which is also a very slim pool, or in 2026. So it's another year of development very likely on the way for guys like Jake Haener and especially Spencer Rattler, who a lot of people are going to be excited about, of course. The reason why we're discussing this today is because obviously Spencer Rattler just nearly pulled off a huge 17-point comeback up against the Washington Commanders. But on top of that, the NFL draft has been massively impacted when it comes to the quarterback position over the course of the last few days. If you take a look at some of the top quarterbacks in this year's draft class, outside of guys like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, some of the bigger names that were going to be out there were names like Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, Jalen Milroe out of Alabama, Drew Allar out of Penn State. Well, 2 of the guys that I just mentioned have already declared that they're going back and returning to their college programs for 2025 and will not be declaring for the NFL draft. And as far as I understand it, most of the expectations around Alabama's Jalen Milroe is that he is likely to do the same thing. The only other quarterback that really exists within or just outside the top 5 guys that some people are interested in is Carson Beck, who is indeed entering the draft, but you're starting to get to the mid-round quarterbacks. And then you have to have the conversation, are the mid-round quarterbacks like Carson Beck and Jackson Dart and some of these other guys any better than the players that you already have in the building who are going to have, by that time, multiple years experience in your system? I think this is a pretty easy no for me, unless whoever the new head coach is for the New Orleans Saints, which are going to dive back into that conversation a little bit tomorrow, says otherwise. We'll see exactly which way that all goes, depending upon how how the head coach search goes over the course of the offseason. The Saints could go and make things a little bit interesting through the free agency market, but honestly, outside of Sam Darnold, and then maybe some people feel really good about Justin Fields, I personally do, but Justin Fields is kind of one of those, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Binary. It's very binary in terms of the response between those who polarizing. He's a very polarizing guy. Some people love him and think that he's going to be very talented, especially after seeing what he was able to do in Pittsburgh and all these other things. Others are like, the Chicago days kind of ruined him, not really feeling good about him, whatever that might be. But Sam Darnold and Justin Fields kind of headline next year's free agency class outside of guys like Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Taylor Heineke and Drew Lock and Andy Dalton again. You know what I mean? Like, not really a very stacked free agency class of quarterbacks either. So with a limited pool in free agency, and by the way, Sam Darnold could be an option, but he just had a massive breakout year, or is having a massive breakout year with the Minnesota Vikings, and is about to become a free agent in an offseason where no other top free agent quarterbacks are hitting the market or are set to hit the market at this time, and no solid quarterback options outside of the top two exist in the NFL draft. So make no mistake about it, Sam Darnold is going to get absolutely paid, and it will be somewhere else because the Saints are not in a position to pay another quarterback a lot of money, because they're probably still going to have Derek Carr, if not on the roster, on the books. But I think Derek Carr will be on the roster again in 2025. And so for the Saints, focusing on their young potential starting quarterback, their young rookie quarterback this year in Spencer Rattler, I think is the way to go. You look at all of the other quarterbacks that are going to be available in the mid rounds of this year's draft, and I have a hard time seeing where any of those guys give you better than what you get with Spencer Rattler, who has a season under his belt by that point. You know what I mean? It's not just about the raw talent of the players, because you might be able to make those arguments in terms of raw talent, all these other things. But if the Saints carry either the same or a similar system going into next year, that easily gives Spencer Rattler the leg up. It gives a guy like Jake Haener the leg up over the rest of the draft class, in my opinion, as well, because he'll have had 2 years with this team, 2 years with some version of this offense, and then potentially going into a third version of the offense. Maybe that ends up equalizing things a little bit, but nonetheless, 2 years of NFL experience, a year of NFL experience, that's going to matter to guys like Mickey Loomis and to people like, the owner group and Gail Benson and her group and all those other things. That's all going to matter when it comes to these guys. So do you turn your potential development focus over to somebody that's freshly drafted, or somebody that you've already begun to invest in, and instead start building around the rest of that roster where you have needs at wide receiver, your interior offensive line, running back might be a spot to go, tight end could be a spot to go, defensive line, cornerback, like safety. There's still so many places for this New Orleans Saints team to invest without having to really mess around with what is a worsening quarterback class that could get even worse in the weeks to come based on the decision that Jalen Milroe makes out of Alabama. Yeah, I think you're better off focusing with Spencer Rattler than you are trying to split focus and add yet another young quarterback to this building in 2025. That's my expectation for the New Orleans Saints, or at least that would be my advice to the New Orleans Saints. Avoid the 2025 draft class unless one of those top guys somehow falls into your lap, or you decide to get froggy and leap and move up to go and grab a guy like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. And even then, I have my question marks about those prospects as well. I would consider building around the quarterback, developing the quarterback, and then seeing what you've got from there forward. Coming up next, what led to a lot of positive sort of outlook around Spencer Rattler over the course of the last 24 hours happened in the final 2 minutes of the game up against the Washington Commanders. So let's break down the 2-minute drive, why it was well orchestrated and how it was well executed as well. We got that coming for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. The holidays are here, and everybody has their own way of staying cozy. For some, it's all about wrapping up in a blanket, enjoying a hot cocoa, and watching movies, Christmas movies with the family that keeps you nice and cozy all throughout the holiday month. For others, things could be a little bit different, and that's why I turn sometimes to therapy, because I don't always have that kind of option. And therapy is a great way to kind of give yourself the tools that you need to be able to find the things that will comfort you and then never go away even when the season changes. So if you want to stay in that comfy mode, BetterHelp, therapy, talking about things that you're dealing with, all of that can go a really, really long way for you. So I highly recommend it. If you've been thinking about therapy, I highly suggest that you try out BetterHelp. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule because it's entirely online. I've been using it for years. I hope that you'll find some comfort in it as well. So find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon. You'll get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And now with the new expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all of the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show, which is presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern time, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling it out with the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then you've got the Clemson Tigers taking on and looking to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So don't miss a second, a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, family, when the New Orleans Saints needed it best, they got it when it came to play calling and execution in the final 2 minutes of the game, putting the New Orleans Saints in position to be just 1 2-point conversion away. A well-thrown pass that went off the hands of tight end Juwan Johnson, by the way. It was right there for him, but just inches away or an inch away or half an inch away, however it is that you want to look at it, from a humongous upset and win up against Washington Commanders. I'll remind you that they were 7.5-point favorites. It's the largest amount given against the New Orleans Saints or laid against the New Orleans Saints since 1999. And by the way, it gets even worse. They go into Lambeau Field next week on Monday night, 13.5-point underdogs. I don't even know the last time the New Orleans Saints were considered that out of class with a team that they're about to go up against. But if you like the New Orleans Saints to cover, you can go and check out FanDuel on that. But the Saints covered in this one, lost just by 1 point. How did they get there? Well, let's look at the basics. It was an 11-play, 56-yard drive that ended up getting the New Orleans Saints to the point to where they were able to get into the end zone on a touchdown to Foster Moreau, 1-yard touchdown, and then just getting that 2-point conversion almost there. If you look at the Saints' first half, they had two first downs in the entire first half, one in quarter one, one in quarter two. In the final drive of this game, 5 first downs in this game. And if you look really at the 4 possessions, which were all scoring possessions in the fourth quarter, in the second half, 3 first downs, 4 first downs, 3 first downs, 5 first downs. So really, they got a lot better towards that point. The Saints had a total of, what is that? Total of 15 first downs in the second half, 2 in the first half. But the 5 first downs during the 2-minute drive is a big part of what they were, what helped them be able to, of course, move the ball down the way. So how did they do it? 11 plays, 56 yards. Well, they did it pretty evenly. 28 yards came from Spencer Rattler as a passer. 28 yards came from Kendre Miller, the Saints' second-year running back, and out of TCU. That came from him as a rusher. He had a 12-yard run, a little 7-yard run, another big run, and then he ended up having one that actually lost him 2 yards, but they still ended up with 28 total rushing yards on that drive on just 4 rushes. So in that case, you look at Kendre Miller averaging 7 yards per carry over the course of that closing drive. Spencer Rattler was 5 for 7, technically, because the spike is considered an incomplete pass. But if you take the spike out, he was 5 of 6 for 28 yards and a passing touchdown in that one. And you could just see the orchestration of this drive. I love that the Saints took this one over. They took it over with 1 minute and 55 seconds left on the clock. So just barely under 2 minutes. And the first thing they do is run the ball, and they run it right up the middle. So you don't necessarily get the drive started with the potential nerves of your rookie quarterback. Instead, you put the ball in the hands of your surefire, in this game, running back, who was already averaging over 4 yards per carry. He finished this game averaging 5 yards per carry, and again, averaged 7 yards per carry in that final drive. And not only did they hand the ball off to Kendre Miller, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands to start the drive, creating some patience, calming down the nerves, all those other things, but they also ran Kendre Miller on the inside out of shotgun, something he did incredibly effectively all throughout his career at TCU. And the big thing, and one of the big question marks going into this season with Kendre Miller outside of his health, was can he adjust to the outside zone run game? So what did the New Orleans Saints do? Not only did they eliminate the potential nerves of the young rookie quarterback, But when they put the ball in the hands of their young second-year running back, they had him do something that he has been doing for years and run up the middle on an inside zone run out of shotgun, as opposed to the Saints' bread and butter, which has been the outside zone run. So a good understanding from Klint Kubiak there of what it is that will help a team get comfortable right away, help their players be comfortable right away, and go out there and get the yards that they need. They follow up that run, which ends up going for 12 yards on that one, with a quick 3-yard pass to Juwan Johnson over on the outside. So in this play, the Saints come out, and instead of, again, putting Spencer Rattler in a situation to where he's got to go out there and pick up chunk yards right away, just go and get him a quick completion. And that's exactly what this play was designed to do. You got 2 receivers on one side, 2 receivers on the other side. They're in shotgun. They're operating comfortably. They run Juwan Johnson underneath the outside receiver. Boom, quick hit. Juwan Johnson actually bobbles the ball a little bit, but then catches it, gets in bounds. Now, this is where things got a little bit weird, right? So he catches it, lands in bounds, and then the pass was ruled incomplete. So then on official review, which is like the quick review, so the Saints didn't have to challenge this, but on the official review, they end up reviewing this and then deciding, it's a catch. We messed up. My bad. Never mind. But now you have to give up 10 seconds or take a timeout, which is one of the worst things, one of the worst NFL rules ever. And there was just a lot of dumb stuff with the officiating in this game for both sides of the football. But so the Saints get that catch. They continue to move forward. Then they get Kendre Miller again, 6 yards, this time on the outside zone from the shotgun. So continuing to do that. Great blocking, a great seal from Lucas Patrick, who came across the formation as the pulling guard, getting the outside block there. Excellent stuff. They turn around, they get this big completion to Kevin Austin, and then they start to get on a roll. I don't want to go like sequentially here and talk like every play. That's kind of boring for you. But then what you saw was the Saints getting the ball out quickly of Spencer Rattler's hands. Good design in all of these, operating out of the shotgun, keeping the defense looking the same all throughout. That's the quality, or that's one of the benefits of the up tempo. So then they find their way all the way down to the red zone. They get the -2 yard run. That was just a whiff by Lucas Patrick as he crossed the formation and get the block on the backside. You also had somebody blow through Cesar Ruiz as well to get that interior penetration there on Kendre Miller. So they lost 2 yards, but then didn't lose a step. Continued to push, continued to pick up yards, go to the air. Foster Moreau was awesome, blocking at one point, shedding off of that block once Spencer Rattler started to move around. Spencer Rattler dumping it off to him. Foster Moreau taking it, getting upfield immediately on a 4th and 3, picking up 7 yards and getting the ball down to the 1 yard line. Getting up to Spike. I know everybody's talking about the delayed clock. Like I said, it went both ways when it came to how bad the officiating was and how bad everything was when it came to all of it. I don't know if you saw the pool report that Luke Johnson over at NOLA.com did, but the official was basically just like, well, it happened. Sorry, no, we can do about it. Bye. And so this is why the NFL needs to have some type of accountability system for referees, because that person's going to end up operating the clock in the Super Bowl later on this year or something crazy like that, because there's never any repercussions. But anyway, I digress. We don't need to talk about the zebras here. But for the Saints, the next thing that they do is that they end up finding this 1 yard play to Foster Moreau for the touchdown. Just very well run, little flood concept, little high-low, and then Spencer Rattler takes a snap, 3-step drop, immediately turns, gets the ball out, and then finds on a perfectly placed pass, low and outside, to Foster Moreau for the touchdown catch. Again, playing to everyone's strengths, right? Quick process, get the ball out, take advantage of what the defense has already shown you they're going to do. All these things are well called play. And remember, that was with 3 seconds left. That was the final play of regulation right there. And the Saints were able to get that done. Then you get to the 2-point conversion. I'm still not mad at the 2-point conversion. Not mad that they made the call to try it. Not mad at the play design either. You had 3 options in the end zone there. One that was coming from the backside, so maybe you would just call it 2 options in the end zone. Opportunity for Spencer Rattler, if he wanted to try to run, could have been there, but Washington defended it well. And honestly, Rattler's decision to go to Juwan Johnson was the right one. Hits Juwan Johnson right in the hands, but he's not able to come up with it. So up until that point, perfectly executed, but I will say excellently called, outstanding calls all throughout by Klint Kubiak for this New Orleans Saints 2-minute drive that almost won them a game that they had, for all intents and purposes, from the experts, the predictions, all that other stuff, that they had no business even being in the first place. And that's the way that one wrapped up. So excellent stuff there from Klint Kubiak, building, scaffolding, right? Putting stuff together, putting guys in position to be comfortable, throwing on the move for Spencer Rattler, running on the inside for Kendre Miller, and then opening things up. Just a real excellent job of an example of playing to your players' strengths, putting them in position to succeed, and doing just enough of the punch counterpunch to keep that defense off balance. And they almost did it all the way to a victory. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints defense got 8 sacks during this game. And one of the things that it tells us is a lot of growth for that defensive line. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you took the New Orleans Saints to cover their 7.5-point spread at home up against the Washington Commanders, you're a happy camper today because you definitely walked away with a win there. Saints losing by only 1 point. Next week, they open up as 13.5-point underdogs up against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau. So road dogs big time when it comes to the New Orleans Saints in this one. So if you want to get in on that action and more, you can find it all over at FanDuel.com. And if you're a new customer, it gets even better. Because as a new customer, you can win $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. You can download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, get in on all the live betting, live stats, play-by-play as well, all there in the same place where you place your bets and more. So go and check them out today at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints finish up with 8 sacks up against the Washington Commanders in this past Sunday's game, and it showed a lot of growth for that New Orleans Saints defensive line. 8 sacks in this one, 2 by Cam Jordan, 2 by Chase Young, and you get 1 each from linebackers Demario Davis and Willie Gay Jr. Both of those were, well, I'll get to that in a moment. You got 1 from Ugo Amadi, who's made an awesome impression so far since taking over as the starting nickel corner in New Orleans, and then 1 from Carl Granderson as well. So what I was about to say about the two sacks from the linebackers and Demario Davis and Willie Gay Jr. is that both of those were sacks for no gain. So those are situations to where there's good coverage downfield. Jayden Daniels decides he's going to scramble, runs to the sideline, and ends up getting forced out of bounds at the sideline. And I think that is a big reason why you probably didn't see Jayden Daniels end up with a lot more rushing yards than he ended with. He still went over 60 rushing yards on the day and was the Washington Commanders' leading rusher with 66 yards rushing. But on 11 attempts, that's not what we're used to seeing for the New Orleans Saints, right? Like typically when we talk about we're talking about a quarterback that got away for 11 rushing attempts, we're talking about 100-yard rusher, Jalen Hurts back in the day, things like that, or not back in the day, but what was it? The last couple times they played or whatever. But like you didn't see that in this game. And so those moments with those second level players being able to chase Jayden Daniels out to the boundary is a big reason why his rushing yards were effectively limited in this game to just 6 yards per rush. And I know that sounds like a lot because you think about it oftentimes from like the running back standpoint, but from the quarterback and scrambling quarterback standpoint, that's a pretty good job by the New Orleans Saints holding that down. So I thought it was going to be a lot worse, especially considering that 24 of those 66 rushing yards came on 1 run, 1 scramble. I thought the Saints did a really, really good job there, but 2 of those good jobs turned into sacks as opposed to just limiting the runs or run stops, however it is that you want to look at it. The other sacks came in a variety of different ways. We saw a quick win by Ugo Amadi on the blitz from the outside. He came up over the right side of the offensive line, got around, did a good job sticking and staying in front of Jayden Daniels and then attacking to get the sack. Awesome stuff from Ugo Amadi, who I think ever since Marshawn Lattimore was traded away, so Saints had already lost Paulson Adebo earlier on, right? One of their starting corners with that broken femur. He was at the game yesterday, by the way. He was talking with some Commanders folks. He was talking with, did the prayer circle with the Saints DBs, was chatting with Alante Taylor before the game and stuff like that. So really cool to see him out there. He was wearing sweats, so I couldn't tell if there was a brace or anything, but he didn't have any assisted, nothing to assist, no crutches, nothing like that. So that was really good to see for Paulson Adebo, who is a free agent this offseason, could be back with New Orleans, could maybe not be back with New Orleans. We'll see which way they go there. But I think there's a chance that he ends up sticking around, which would be good for the Saints if he's able to return to his level of play. But I do think that, they lost him. Then they traded away Marshawn Lattimore to the Washington Commanders. He actually played like 53 snaps yesterday. You just didn't really hear about him because he didn't really get targeted at all throughout, which is kind of what Marshawn Lattimore does. It's kind of the purpose of Marshawn Lattimore. So no big surprises there. Lattimore was targeted a whopping, 0 times entirely. So yeah, he doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but it's because nobody threw at him. So once that happened and they traded away Marshawn Lattimore, Alontae Taylor moved to the outside. Kool-Aid McKinstry was already starting, ended up starting on the outside. And then Ugo Amadi ended up moving to the nickel spot. He's been the backup nickel for New Orleans basically since he's been here. And so that made a lot of sense. And he has absolutely taken advantage of that, especially over the course of the past few games. Ends up getting his second sack of the season, had his first one against the Chargers a few weeks ago. So then from that point, you end up in a situation to where you have all these defensive linemen getting sacks. Brian Brzee did not get a sack in this game, but 12 double teams and 2 sacks on those double teams shows you that sometimes you impact the game by not being the one to register on the stat sheet. So good stuff there. There were 3 additional times while Brian Brzee was double teamed that Jaden Daniels was forced to scramble. So you could see some of the one-on-ones being won elsewhere. And that's what you saw with Cam Jordan with his 2, 1-1 on the interior, 1-1 on the outside. Chase Young won both of his on the outside, and then Carl Granderson getting his win as well. And you saw a little bit of a blend there too. You saw a quick pressure from Chase Young around one of the edges, getting to the quarterback in one of his sacks. On another couple, the coverage was there. Jaden Daniels tried to scramble, and then everybody collapsed. One of Cam Jordan's sacks actually came from the interior because Chase Young bent around the edge, forced Jaden Daniels to step up in the pocket, and then Cam Jordan was able to collapse and then get the sack. I believe that was his second sack of the day is how he got that. So you're seeing some growth here from the New Orleans Saints defensive line. Were they aided by coverage? Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea, right? It's supposed to be a symbiotic relationship between coverage, rush, coverage, rush. That's the idea. And so the pass rush always benefits a bit from the coverage. It's supposed to. And therefore the coverage sometimes benefits from the pass rush, as we've seen in the past, although not so much this kind of latter half of the season or last few games of the season where the Saints haven't really gotten any takeaways in quite some time. But you add 8 sacks in there and it has a pretty similar impact, a pretty similar effect. So what's the things that we're seeing the New Orleans Saints are growing with? Well, things are just kind of simplified for them right now when it comes to the defensive line. They're being put in positions to take on one-on-ones. And they've been focusing on the fundamentals ever since Brian Young took over the defensive line. It's been a focus on hand placement. It's been a focus on hand fighting. It's been a focus on violent releases. It's been a focus on leverage. It's been a focus on all those pieces, run fits, run gap integrity, all those things. Just been these focuses on these little deals. You heard Cam Jordan talking about it after the game. And if you didn't, I'll tell you a little bit about it. What he basically said, they're not overcomplicating things anymore. They're not in a situation to where you're doing the X's and O's stuff too much. It's a how do I win at my position kind of mentality all of a sudden. And that's what Brian Young has kind of brought to this team. Remember, the Saints hired Todd Grantham to be their defensive line coach. There was a lot of praise around Todd Grantham early on in his tenure. But then over the course of the past few years, you've seen the sacks come down ever since it's been, since Ryan Nielsen left, basically. You've seen the sack numbers topple. You've seen all that stuff come down. And then, of course, that one final year with Ryan Nielsen where he wasn't just a defensive line coach, but he was also co-defensive coordinator. So it was just a lot of split focus and all those other things. So Grantham just kind of continued that trend of trending downwards in terms of number of sacks, porous run defense, all those other things. And so for the Saints, right now, Todd Grantham got moved off of the defensive line. This was a Darren Rizzi call, moved to being kind of a senior defensive assistant. Brian Young, former defensive lineman, former New Orleans Saints defensive lineman who's been with the team forever, he takes over the defensive line. Todd Grantham eventually takes a job with the Oklahoma State Cowboys. And so he's gone. He didn't even finish a season with New Orleans. And now all of a sudden the Saints are getting 8 sacks in a season. So I'm not saying Todd Grantham was the problem, but I'm saying that Brian Young has done something different, and that has been the solution. That's really the thing that I want to lean on here. And it's working. It's working really well with the New Orleans Saints. So I think that the Saints have a real opportunity to add more talent to their defensive line over the course of this offseason, try to re-sign Chase Young, keep him in New Orleans. I think you're going to see some guys walk. Like, I don't know if Peyton Turner is going to be back next year, stuff like that. So I think you've got some space to bring in some guys. You can do that through the draft. You can do that through free agency, all that. We'll see what the new defensive system looks like next year. But I think you've learned and seen that simplifying the game for this defensive line is really all that you need. You don't have to overcomplicate things. And clearly that's made a big difference for the New Orleans Saints, who have just gotten better and better and better on the defensive line, particularly in the pass rush over the course of the last few games. All right, y'all, coming up on tomorrow's episode, we're going to dive into Darren Rizzi's press conference, which he's doing a little bit later on today. So we'll dive into that for tomorrow's episode, some key takeaways, maybe hopefully an injury update on Alvin Kamara, and of course the progress for Derek Carr. We'll dive into all of it in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On NFL as well. And of course, we thank you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.